And I think we're kicking off the recording. So, real quick before we start here, I think we're just going to do some quick introductions. Everybody here on the call is on the Sprocket Security Penetration Testing team. So, it's kind of all of our backgrounds, a little more technical. I'm Nicholas Anastasi, the Director of Technical Operations here at Sprocket. Kind of a fancy way of saying that I help lead the service delivery team and also kind of been around for quite a while. So familiar with our processes and that sort of thing, located in Madison, Wisconsin, near our main offices. And yeah, I'll kick it over to Nate.
Good afternoon. Happy Friday to everybody. I'm Nate. I am also a penetration tester, like Nicholas mentioned. I've been with Sprocket for almost 4 years now. So I get to enjoy working every day with Will, Nick, and Nicholas, hacking all the things and, having fun and doing all that stuff. So, and I'm based out of Ohio. Will, I'll kick it over to you.
Everyone, Will Vandevanter. I'm on service delivery team as well as a researcher. Spend about half my time focused in pen testing, other half in automation, but changes a little bit depending on what we're looking at. Been Sprocket coming up on 2 years. And again, yeah, good to hack with these guys. Super fun. I'm excited about the topic for today. Like ASM is a fun one to like talk about hacking. So, Nick, I'll kick it over to you.
Thank you, Will. Appreciate it. Like Nate said, happy Friday, everybody. Appreciate you joining. I'm pretty new to Sprocket here. I've been here a couple months. My name's Nick Hours, pen tester as well. And I am out of Buffalo. So like I said, new to Sprocket. I've been pen testing for 6 or 7 years. So looking forward to talking about ASM with the team here today.
Yeah, cool. So that's kind of our Nick, it's a good transition into attack surface management, or ASM. Really, today we're gonna keep everything a little bit loose, primarily focus on like what ASM means to Sprocket and where it's coming from and that sort of thing, why we're building it out and have built it out over the years. I think our origin story for building attack surface management, especially into our platform we have now, is it's probably a little different than some of the other organizations out there that have the offering. I'll say, and then I'll start talking, guys, and then you guys cut me off and come up with ideas. Everybody here knows me; I could talk for an hour straight if you let me. So, but so right, we're gonna kind of focus on attack surface management, what we have in our platform today, kind of why it's important to the testing that we do, and how we use it in day-to-day penetration testing. As a background with attack surface management here at Sprocket, we built it originally to support our testing team. And so from day one, we did have a solution in place that was really only visible to testers. What our problem is, especially with doing kind of the scaled testing, and I think this is like representative of like bug bounty hunters and things out there as well. It's a lot of data to comb through when you're hacking, right? If you're doing a single company or something like that, it's pretty easy to get a handle on what you're looking at and what you need to test. But with us, right, having that large scale visibility and things is really important. Big things you see, like, and guys like chime in here, but right, like for us, it's really important to take a look at like IP addresses, services, domain, DNS records, and websites, usernames, that sort of thing. It all kind of feeds into how we do pen testing. If you guys had to pick, I guess, like out of those, what's something you look at the most on a pen test? I'll hope web apps. I'm always looking at web applications and changes there, because the majority of the attack surface now that we see, like, I I was never around for those days. I'm young, but I know I've heard stories. There used to just be services on the internet that you could own all the time. Lucky you guys. Just random ports poking out there. You don't see that as much, but yeah.
Yeah, so I was even I was gonna get like more granular, like definitely web apps, and even going down to like host names, right? Like we see like Jenkins.xyz or GraphQL, you know what I mean? Staging.company.com. Like those are all flags for, for change control, where we want to be hopping on that. Or Grafana, locate, so many in there. But yeah, definitely web apps for me if I'm voting. And I know I'm preaching to the choir there. Like I know all you guys look at the host names as well, but I thought I'd just throw that out the start.
Nick, what about you guys?
Yeah, my vote would definitely be web apps. I think, even like you said, Nicholas, about, you know, back in the day or old school sort of, you get lucky, where you would port scan and find some random high numbered port, and you can netcat to it, and then you fuzz it, and then it just keels over, and you get some, memory dump or something like that. Like there's a lot of technologies in place now, like Cloudflare and all of these sort of things that sit between us as testers and the valuable data that we're ultimately after, that did not exist in the past. And while that's true in pretty much every area of technology, InfoSec included, it adds definitely a certain higher level of technical challenges for us as testers. Everybody, there's a collective groan across the entire shared workspace when we come across certain technologies like Cloudflare, or things that make it harder to do change detection. And so web apps for sure, but there are challenges and unique challenges around, finding changes in web apps versus, like Will mentioned, uh, you know, host names. That's a pretty high level, high fidelity signal. Um, with a web app, it might look different. So long-winded way of saying agree, but there's challenges that make it not as um, fun, I guess, as it used to be. But there's fun in the challenge, of course, which is why we're all hackers.
Like Nick, similar boat.
Yeah, it might be a little bit of traditional IT background prior to cyber, but I like that I could really quickly start to almost paint the network environment map, right? Like what maybe is an on-prem app, what cloud services are they relying on, and kind of start to in my head almost have a little Visio diagram of the environment I'm starting to target. It's these IP addresses all belong to Amazon, and there's where they have X, Y, and Z application. Cool. Here's VPN. That's probably going to a home office, not always. Um, kind of starting to make those sort of connections and just thinking, what can I quickly really figure out from ASM data that would traditionally be discovered doing a lot of footwork in terms of recon and mapping. And I mean, you're just speeding that whole process up when you have that data up to date in an ASM platform. So I think that's the one for me.
Yeah, I'd add to that too, like to your point, Nick. Like once you form that Visio, then you also see outliers. Like I can think of assessment Nicholas and I were doing not that long ago, where it was mostly Azure, but all of a sudden there's this one GCP post, and it says something in the title that's like, this is very unusual. So those outliers, and can start to come out as well once we form that mental model.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense too. It's a good point.
Sometimes I feel like testers all have like a version of ASM in their brain where like I it's crazy. I can look at an IP and tell you the customer just based off the IP sometimes, and I'm like, we have tens of thousands. Like, I don't know how I know that, but like it pops out, or sometimes we'll ping in domains and we'll know so and so has that one or this one. And you start to be able you got to mentally be able to filter a lot of data very, very quickly. And I think that just come over the years. Like it I'll have people watch me like scroll through logs, like family or something like that, and they'll be like, "How do you even know what that says on the screen right now?" And it's the same sort of thing, looking at like 10,000 subdomains or something, and you're like, "Oh, okay, that one, that one, that one." And it comes with time, but I think like ASM kind of helped solve that a little bit. Just putting it in a presentation format that isn't text files on your box, putting them in a web UI and making them easily parsed and that sort of thing. I think Nick and Will kind of touched on a good point where companies don't own like /16s anymore, unless you're a college for some reason. I don't know why they still have them, but uh, so like the data that we're working with is a lot more complex. Like you can look at DNS records, and if you look at IPs, you're going to find stuff in AWS. It's just all over the place now. And so kind of sorting and organizing that data is important. I did see a couple questions here. One from Vera Schmidt. Could you elaborate a little bit on what you mean with that question? And then can also answer Nathan's question here too, while Vera's kind of expanding on that. I I think, right, like at least in relation to pen testing, and this kind of plays into the ASM thing as well. Like there's 1,001 different tools out there, and then they're all getting rewritten in Go and Rust too. So there's another version that comes out as well. But it wrapping your head around like what's worth using and what isn't, and that sort of thing. And with like the attack surface management stuff, it's also like taking the tools that we use every day and turning them into something that can, I don't know, palatable data for customers or for ourselves, not messing around with JQ and parsing data and stuff like that. That kind of sound right to you guys, or one of the more difficult things? I've got 3,000 stars on GitHub, and most of those are from when I first started because I didn't know what the heck I was looking at. Like, and then it kind of, narrowed down a little bit. And now I got my core tool set, but
Yeah, it definitely resonates for me. I mean, I think of time management as almost like one of the hardest things is like, and to your point, like ASM and tools play into that. Like they speed up your ability to cover ground, but you still have to time manage in terms of what you want to focus on and what you think will deliver the most value to you as a tester and then also the customer. But definitely tough for me.
yeah, for sure. Nick, Nate, kind of similar.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, again, kind of sticking with ASM as the main focal point. I'd say anything tool wise, hate it or love it, the tools is more effective 9 times out of 10 paired with the ASM because instead of having one single list of targets to point at that may or may not be the right targets, now you have all sort of context around all the assets ahead of time, and you could kind of smart aim your tool, if that makes sense. So, to your point, yeah, I feel like I used to use a lot more tools, kind of understood the difference, and then eventually all the patterns emerge and you find what tool sets and processes you like. But again, it just tie that to ASM, and now your time management, like Will started to mention, is certainly improved. You still have to think what's the best way to spend my time, but regardless, it's a more efficient more efficient use of time, in that case. So
The way I always describe it, like I did help desk work for like years, like back before I started testing and sysadmin work and stuff like that. And when you first start, like, and as you get better at it, at least with just like tech in general, you start to build this mental flow chart of like, if this is wrong, then that, and so on and so forth. And then eventually you get to the point where your brain just kind of jumps to, okay, it's probably this, right? Like pen testing, I had to learn it again, right? That mental flow chart of if I see this, then I can do that, or I know this CVE is there, or I can password spray this, but I can't do this, and that sort of thing. So like a lot of ASM, or really a lot of the tools you see come out nowadays, are like, it's like, how do I do this at scale? But then also, how do I make the data something like useful for me? Like, I think we've all been down the terrible vuln scanner rabbit hole when you first started, where you're like, there's 10,000 things in here. What the heck matters? And same with like burp or something like that. And then you start to learn like, oh, that's a nothing burger. That's a nothing burger. Like, and you start to focus on the stuff that stands out and that sort of thing. So, and with us too. Like I watch Will do stuff all the time that surprises me. Like, oh, just put a backpick here or like a dash and see what happens, like in an app or something like that. And knowing where to stick those things to look for errors and problems, like that just comes with time and a lot of practice, I guess. So, um, yeah. To pivot though, I you know wanted to see if you guys had any good examples of times we have all this data, but then how we've leveraged it in the past to kind of narrow down and find a vuln or something like that. I've got one that stands out that I can talk about and then kind of kick it over to you guys for thoughts. But when the Palo Alto Global Protect vuln came out last year, kind of wrapping our heads around where it was across our customers and then being able to test very quickly for it. Traditional attackers, right? Like they can just go on Shodan and find one and try to pop it. With us, it's filtering through like tens of thousands of IPs and finding that global protect instance or something like that and narrowing down so we can actually do exploitation. But Will, I would say like we were able to really quickly get a handle on who had what out there, right?
Yeah, there were some nice fingerprints we used with ASM to immediately identify. I think, what do we have, like 20 instances within a couple minutes? Like,
Yeah.
and we targeted those directly and got remote code execution almost immediately on a bunch of them. And that only came from having that data available already through ASO. So absolutely, yeah, that's a great example. I mean, Q1 last year was wild. Like RCEs and SSL VPNs, it was like Palo Alto, Avanti. Who else was in there? Fortinet had multiple.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it didn't mean to derail you, Nicholas, but yeah, all that came to mind for sure.
Yeah. It's being able to find that stuff. That's important. Definitely. And then I think, right, like when we have that data, it's a lot easier to spend time on R&D and like working out like those vulns and understanding them and displaying that information to customers or writing blog posts and things like that. It felt like it was a lot less corralling data and a lot more like, all right, how do we get shells? Like, or steal stuff and actually show that off to clients and that sort of thing.
I think that's a huge undersold aspect of having a really robust ASM like platform or whatever is having the data first versus go back 5 years, and if something like this were to come out, what would we do, right? You'd have to go scan. You'd have to actually go and do the fingerprinting versus, now we already have the data. So like you not only save a whole bunch of time, but then it lets you build, like Will mentioned, fingerprints based on, favicon hashing, or there's 1,000 different ways to fingerprint something. But I think there's really interesting and valuable information and not just knowing where to look, but having data at your disposal to be able to work and massage and say, hey, I want to look for this particular URL path where the web page contains, a certain string. And so that lets you not only find, exposed SSL VPN interfaces, but really anything that you would ever need to look for. And I think that's not just being able to look at your attack surface for vulnerability exposure purposes, but also from a threat hunting or um, general aspects too. So I think that's an interesting piece for us as testers too.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Nick. Sorry.
No. This is actually a topic, or obviously the whole topic I prepared for, but this, like, a subtopic is something I really did think a lot about. A little more specific to just our role with ASM, but we're replicating threat actors, right? And the thing you're going to see threat actors do a lot when those new 0 days hit the market, or 1 days or whatever, hit the web, hit the public, is they're going to spray them across the web. But I would assume at least the well-resourced threat actors have their own version of an ASM and already know a lot of IP addresses running a Fortinet SSL VPN. And they're already probably keeping track of a lot of a lot of those things. So when we talk about, like 5 years ago, or, my pen test experience really isn't with any sort of ASM product. It's the organic, go do all the recon, go do all that. If there ever was a time I wanted to kind of scale an exploit, it was Google Dorks, Shodan, hopefully find a few. Most of them aren't going to be in scope for obviously pen testers have that limit and threat actors don't. But what's cool here at Sprocket is we're scaling and we have more and more clients. We have more and more assets we're tracking, right? And whether it's an interesting thing we kind of found on our own that's not well documented or documented at all, or it's something that is well documented and we just want to test a bunch of clients really quick. It's almost like our little mini global ASM, threat actor platform, so to speak. But then obviously, clients of ours or anybody who's using an ASM is realistically going to benefit in a similar way, able to see, hey, do I have vulnerable thing, really quickly. And I almost would tie that back again, traditional IT mentality to your asset management. I would say attack surface management is much more goal oriented, and I would say there's probably a lot more data in your attack surface management. But asset management, right? You can't protect what you don't know about. So whether you're an attacker, whether you're the defender, the threat hunter, there's definitely valuable data in knowing the whole surface.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's SANS top 20, right? For the longest time, probably still today is the top in their top 20 security controls. Number one is inventory of authorized and unauthorized assets. Like
Yep.
that's even before the term, maybe not, but I'd be willing to wager even before the term attack surface management ever existed. Top security control in place is, you have to know what you have before you can ever even pretend to protect it. And yeah, for sure.
Yeah. It's kind of easy on a internal network almost, where you can push an agent out with group policy to everything, and you don't really have to know what it is or what it's doing to get that agent there very quickly. But like, I almost think about it from like a customer's perspective on an external side. Like, you might have 3 or 4, you could be hosting in AWS, have stuff on-prem, have different network segments that are poked to the internet, that sort of thing, and then you're figuring out what a networking appliance has these, like, assets managed, which one don't. You almost need to do, like, what a pen tester does, where you're, like, port scan. Not everybody's, like, prepared to do that or has the time, and it's also, like, hard to make sure that data's reliable and that sort of thing. I've probably had, not 100, but, m dozens of conversations with, like, new customers coming on board here, just companies I've talked to, where first thing they say to me is like, "We don't know what we have," and that's scary. Like, I can see from their perspective, like, not knowing what's on the internet is tough, like, and then going back and wrapping your head around it, like, yeah, it's a big thing to deal with. One of the things that, like, I think is, like, a valuable use case for companies that do a lot of development and have, like, QA and staging environments and things like that, just going into host names and searching QA or UAT or, like, that sort of thing. Like, I think, way too many companies don't realize that their staging environments and that sort of thing are just poked out to the internet for anybody to touch. Like, that's, you know, any big development shop comes to us and they were like, "What do I search for in ASM?" Like, right away, I would say, like, figure out if that, like, goopy staging environment that you don't actually manage in IT, but DevOps does, like, is on the internet or not. Because I know, Will, you and I, well, you even more so, like, had some stories surrounding that, like, default creds across the board places, and then the Lucy stuff that we had, like, stands out.
Yeah, that came to mind instantly. I mean, the Lucy stuff, and also like you were talking about like UAT, like we found it was UAT for like one of the global components, and you browse to the page and it was just API keys. You remember that? Just like
Yeah.
all these API keys just posted out there. And like to your point, like those I mean, by their nature, those environments are constantly being changed and like things are being tried out on them and thrown out on there. And so it's like, that's a dangerous playground to be playing live fire with. So yeah, absolutely.
And large companies too, like, I think you try to get your hands around every department that has the ability to put something on the internet, but like that's not possible. It's just really not doable. And so um getting like a proactive and then being able to react like as quickly as possible that is the most valuable thing to do in those sort of cases. Like, but then at the same time, like some companies don't. This is a story from a long time ago. Um, some companies, like, they just have on-prem infrastructure, they just host stuff themselves, and they might have, like, 5, 6 IPs on the internet and a couple different things. We had a company that screwed up a firewall change and popped, like, LDAP out to the internet and SMB on a bunch of hosts and stuff like that, and back with the ASM we had when we first started like 5 years ago, like, we caught that pretty quick, and all of a sudden we're like, "Whoa, like, we can talk to LDAP, like, from the internet." And, we got to tell them about it right away, but that's not a super common thing I mean, it hasn't popped up in the last, 5 years, but, when it does happen, I mean, you can make huge mistakes even if you're managing it all yourself and there aren't like all these separate departments and stuff like that managing infrastructure. So, yeah, definitely a difficult problem to wrap your head around.
I wonder if there's any parallels to be thought of or had between effective mitigating controls that people in InfoSec that we commonly prescribe against phishing and wrapping controls around attack surface management, right? So like the common thing that we tell everybody or everybody that's listening is we all know what phishing is, and it's, don't click on links and emails, be suspicious of everything. But we all know that that's rather infallible piece of advice. And so what we're trying to do is we try to minimize the risk and minimize the damage that a lone click does in an email, right? So you assume that somebody's going to click on a malicious link. Okay, how do I minimize the threat as fast as possible? And you build these security layers around and have your defense in depth type deal. That's the advice, and that's the nature of the advice that we give. I wonder if there's any parallels to be had between that and, like you said, Nicholas, it's really hard for larger organizations to get a handle and a corral on all of the externally exposed assets that somebody has. And it's like, well, what do you do when you accidentally expose UAT or, API keys in a UAT environment? It's like, how do you mitigate in a layering perspective the damage that can be done by exposing API keys or anything that comes out of attack surface management? That's more of a philosophical IT tangent, but that just got me thinking, right? Like, we give common advice on one problem in InfoSec. Here's another area of InfoSec. Is there any possibility of relation between those pieces of advice that would then maybe lend some other interesting pieces of information out?
if I understood your question correctly, I'm going to do a Sprocket plug and say continuous penetration.
Yeah, okay. I guess it would be continue. Yeah, I guess it would
We
be.
find the keys first and we can tell you how far we could have got with them. Like, like,
Okay, yeah.
yeah, if you get pwned and you have to clean up and be like, you don't want to spend your time like being pwned and then figuring out how whatever got popped was used to compromise the entire network. Like, it'd be much more valuable to have somebody you trust do it, and then not only write a finding on, hey, API keys were exposed, but also tell you like, and then we used them for this, and there was a screw up here, and there was a screw up there, and like that kind of going down the entire path. Like I think a lot of some ASM solutions out there, or really vulnerability scanners in general, like they're so surface level, and that's fine. Like you do need to fix what's at the surface, but never assume that once you fix it once, it's fixed forever, or there isn't going to be a bypass, or so on and so forth. Some actor doesn't have a thing you don't know about, like some exploit or something. Like you got to have that everybody says defense in depth. It feels like you're beating a dead horse when you say it, but like it is important, because like fixing those surface level things aren't a surefire way to slow down an attacker, which is ultimately our goal, right? Because you always assumed you can get popped, but just hope that you have the detection mechanisms and um, just technical controls in place to slow an attacker down after that, so you can catch them and respond before it's too late and that sort of thing. So, um, yeah. But Nate, I think you're like on a good point. You also mentioned or talked about like users a little bit as an attack surface, right? Like phishing and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like I've talked to people who work at like large insurance companies that own a ton of smaller insurance companies, and they don't talk about their attack surface. They talk about, we have 2,500, 5,000 people who can be phished. Chances of something landing are pretty good. And then the second that that user gets phished, they phish everybody else from that user. Like, and it just kind of sprawls out from there. And so, um, I can't imagine being in that position, but like having to also look at, you know, stuff from that perspective has got to be tough. Um, yeah, I can keep rambling there. You look at products that come out like KnowBe4 and stuff, like their whole goal is to get you stats on giant groups of people and build an understanding of like where your risk is and that sort of thing. And really kind of summarizing it and whittling it down and that sort of thing. So, yeah.
What do you have to say, Nick?
I was just going to say that, we kind of talked about how the assets that we've really spent the most time talking about, host names, URLs, web apps, how that's kind of gone distributed with cloud and everything. It's not all on-prem. There's not a lot of people that own big chunks of IP space on the internet anymore. And really just that the same thing has happened with user management, right? Like now you don't just have your 4,000 AD users and maybe a couple SSH accounts to switches and routers or whatever your other, maybe network devices might be. Now you have that. Now you might have some AWS users. You have IAM. You're trying to learn all this kind of authentication in multiple places and users in multiple places. And it's more attack surface, right? It's just one more place and one more thing to think about. That's all I was going to say.
That's a whole nother conversation of like SSO is such a double-edged sword too, because like that's one of your solutions to get a handle on that is like most organizations. I mean, even here at Sprocket, right? But if you have too many permissions assigned to a single user, the second you pop their primary account, oh crap, you have access to AWS and you have access to this and that. And, it feels really good when you get into an Okta portal and you're like, oh, I can touch everything. Like I don't have to pop threads for each individual account, that sort of thing. So,
Right. Which
Yeah.
I think I did. That would be an awesome topic for another webinar. But like, yeah, you're absolutely right, because it reduces some risk in some places, but I feel like there's also a trade-off where, okay, we're not making and sharing weak passwords across multiple different accounts. That increases the attack surface in some cases, but then it, reduces them in other cases. So I think there's a interesting trade-off. Microsoft, of course, being one of the primary drivers of this, seems to be in the camp that overall increases security. I suppose that remains to be seen, but yeah, Nicholas, I'll kick it back over to you to wrap it up.
I think the lesson learned is we shouldn't have employees or any infrastructure or anything, and then we'll just be safe. No asset. Need to go back to typewriters, and yeah, I said that the other day. I was like, we should have just stopped at email. Once somebody did that for the first time, we should have just said awesome and just been done with it, and everything would be cool. But Yeah, sweet. So, I think we're getting close to the end here, guys. Any questions from the audience? Anything we can help out with or answer, that sort of thing. We also do these pretty regularly, and we're accessible. All of us are on LinkedIn and Twitter and stuff like that. So you can always reach out. But yeah, any questions from the audience?
Yeah, so it's a bullseye on that. Exactly, Scott. Yep.
What would Doc 2 look like if you didn't have any computers? No. Yeah, awesome. Thank you guys for the kind words. Appreciate it. Definitely. Yeah, definitely. Awesome. Well, I would say keep an eye out for things related to attack surface management here at Sprocket. This is less of a plug and more of, I think our team is pretty excited. Like, there's a ton of tools that we use on a daily basis that we're really excited to get automated and run at scale. Just because the ASM shouldn't stop with the things we listed. Like, it should be a giant pool of data that then you can point tools and techniques and things like that at to actually, work out findings and show like real impact with it. Because being able to search for something versus act upon it is, you know, um, that's where the value is, right? You wanna catch it before it's too late and all that. So cool. Alrighty. Awesome.
Good deal.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, everybody. Thanks all for joining.
Thank you guys. Take care.